Kia ora, Kiwi Kodja here, and welcome to episode 70, Whangaroa, part 6, Wesleydale, goodbye. At the end of episode 69, we have Hongi shot through the right lung, holding on desperately to life. He's been informed that Wesleydale has been ransacked and the missionaries are gone. It's a blow to his plans. Since that episode, I've come across a first-hand account of the sacking of Wesleydale. It's a report by the Reverend Nathaniel Turner to the Church Missionary Society, or CMS, written soon after the sacking, so I put a lot of credence in it. I found this account so fascinating and shows different aspects of Māori life that I thought I would give it its own episode. Now I'll be reading from the account. I have oranged out parts that I'll leave, but feel free to stop the video and read them. I've added comments to the account which are in italics. Those comments that have an asterisk come from this book, John Hobbs, 1800 to 1883, by Tolla, Williment. Watching parts 1 to 5 will be helpful. For now, let's get into it. On Thursday evening, the 4th of July, 1827, while engaged in divine worship with our native domestics, we were disturbed by the long-expected announcement of Shangi's arrival in the harbour. That's Hongi. The father of a native lad belonging to the mission family delivered the tidings and requested his son to join him, as he said he was fleeing for his life. All now was commotion and anxiety, as Shangi's intentions were yet involved in mystery. The night following, that is Friday night, during the day of Friday, Hongi has been attacking Whangaroa Uru and Wharerahi and has camped at Wharerahi that night. The night following, the whole settlement rang with the cries of the natives, and Te Puhi, with his brother and several other principal men, accompanied by their slaves, fled to Shukianga or Hokianga, a place about 40 miles distance. On Saturday, Hongi stays at Wharerahi, then Sunday morning moves to Paihia. On Sunday morning, the daughter of Shangi and the wife of Tawena, one of his chief allies, with several attendants, came up the river to inform us that he did not intend to visit. Read visit as attack. Our village, that is Te Pohepa and Kainga, though he was angry with Te Puhi for running away, and to request that some of our fighting men would go and assist him in the attack on the Ngati Uru. The men readily complied with this request and immediately proceeded down the river, rejoicing that the storm, which wore so black an aspect towards them, was about to burst on the heads of their neighbours. On the Sunday and Monday, Hongi is preparing his forces for the attack on Taratara. Being now left alone and entirely at the mercy of any marauding party that might be disposed to take advantage of our situation, we determined on Tuesday morning. Tuesday is the day that Hongi attacks Taratara. His army starts out at dawn, with the attack occurring in the afternoon. To acquaint our friends at the Bay of Islands with our affairs and to solicit their help. But about noon, while employed in writing a letter to them, 10 or 12 armed men of the Ngāpuhi, that is, Shangi's tribe, landed from a canoe in which they had come up from the harbour, and having got over our fence, we proceeded towards the house. We went out to meet them and inquired what they wanted. They replied, "We are come to take away your things and burn down your premises. For your place is deserted, and you are a broken people." Happily for us, several of the party were known to Miss Davis, that's Miss Mary Davis, 14, daughter of Richard Davis, living at Paihia, a young lady of the church mission who was then on a visit with us. When they saw her, they were evidently intimidated, fearing that if they were to commit any violence, some of the chiefs would take up our cause and punish them for it, especially as their leader was but a captive, that is, a slave, and therefore had no right to engage in an enterprise of this kind. They were, however, very troublesome and robbed us of several pigs. Before they departed, they intimidated us that we might expect a general plunder tomorrow, and a native lad, Tawena, or David, who had continued with us, overheard them saying that the party was too small to rob us, as, if they were to do so, they should become conspicuous and run the risk of being killed, but that if they were more numerous, so that they might share in the blame as well as in the spoil, they would strip us of everything without delay. At 10 o'clock p.m., Mr. Stack, he is 25, he will become the Reverend James Stack and the father of the future Canon James West Stack, started for Kerikeri, bearing a letter to our brethren of the church establishment, in which we informed them of these occurrences and requested their assistance. About 11 o'clock, as we were on the eve of retiring to rest, two of our female domestics, who had been taken away by their parents on the preceding day, came to the door. They had just arrived from the harbour and informed us that the Ngati Po had abandoned the pa, that's Taratara, and that a division of Shangi's party, which actually includes Hongi himself, had gone in pursuit of the fugitives. At daybreak, sunrise is about 5 a.m, on Wednesday morning, the 10th of January, Luke Wade, our European servant, descried a few natives coming in a direction towards us. He immediately apprised us of it, and by the time that we had put on our clothes and come out, about 20 savages, armed with muskets, spears, hatchets, etc., had entered the mission ground and were hastening towards the house. We demanded their business. They said, "We are come to make a fight." "But why do you wish to do this?" we asked. They replied, "Your chief has fled, and all your people have left the place, and you will be stripped of all your property before noon. Therefore, instantly be gone." Oro, the chief who made this declaration and whose residence is at Waimate, gave orders in the same moment to the rest to break open a small house that was occupied by Luke Wade. This mandate was promptly obeyed, and in a quarter of an hour they had broken not only into that building, but also into the potato and tool house, into the outer kitchen, the upper store, and the carpenter's shop, carrying away everything that they found. As soon as this work of spoliation was commenced, several guns were fired, which appears to have been a signal to others at a distance, for in a few minutes a considerable number joined this lawless band. Now it's around this time Hongi's pursuit party is decamping and setting off in pursuit of Ngati Po down the old Whangaroa Valley. At this juncture, several boys who had been under our care came and expressed their grief at witnessing our circumstances and offered to go with us. We very gladly accepted this proposal, considering that their assistance in carrying the children would be very serviceable. We hastily partook of a little refreshment and got a few things ready for our journey, still resolved, however, not to leave until driven to the last extremity. While in this very distressing state of suspense, the robbers, having emptied all the outbuildings, began to break through the windows and doors of the dwelling house, flocking into every room, carrying off everything that we possessed. At length, however, the last shadow of hope disappeared, and we were fully satisfied that the awful crisis had arrived, in which it was our imperious duty to flee for our lives. About 6 o'clock, therefore, when the work of pillage and devastation had been proceeding with uninterrupted and resistless fury for upwards of an hour, we took our departure, and, with heavy hearts, directed our course towards Kerikeri, the nearest station belonging to the church mission. Our party consisted of 2 missionaries, Monsieur Turner, that is the Reverend Nathaniel Turner, who's 33, and Hobbs, catechist John Hobbs, 26, Mrs. Turner, Mrs. Ann Turner, who had been confined, that is, has given birth to a son, only 5 weeks and was still very weak. 3 small children, this is the Turner's children, Anne 3, Thomas 2, and John 5 weeks. Miss Davis, Miss Mary Ann Davis, 14, Luke Wade, an English servant, and his wife, who had been for several weeks extremely ill and hardly able to move at all. 5 native boys and 2 native girls, all in all 16 persons. We had before us a journey of 20 miles over the most rugged and mountainous country, of which some of the hills are so steep that, but for the roots of the trees which form a sort of steps, they would be almost inaccessible. With much painful solicitude as to the possibility of our travelling so far, we set forward, the strong supporting the weak, and all depending on the aid of divine providence. The road at first leads up a valley through which a river, that is the Kaeo River, pursues its winding course, which it is necessary frequently to cross. Over this stream we had to bear the females upon our arms. Before we reached the path, we were glad to meet 2 other natives in whom we could more safely confide. They are the chiefs Ngā of Te Pohepa and Wharenui, more commonly known as Wharerahi of Waimate. They confirmed the statement as to the approach of the Shukianga party, or the Hokianga party, and recommended us to stay till they had passed. However, we resolved to proceed and prevailed on one of them, Wharenui, a friendly chief from the Bay of Islands, to accompany us. We now went forward with less hesitation, though our minds were still agitated by distressing fears. In a short time, around 7 or 8 a.m., as we were turning a sharp corner of the road, we found ourselves close upon the war party of which we had been apprised, though not so numerous as they had been represented. They had a most formidable appearance. They amounted to several hundred, around 300 probably, and were coming down in one dense mass with the utmost silence and order, and armed with muskets, bayonets, and long-handled hatchets. This was to us a solemn moment, as we were doubtful whether they would prove friends or foes. Wharenui cried out to them to stop, which they did instantly. He then informed the chiefs, that is Patuone, etc., who marched at the head of the body of our circumstances, on which they spoke to us with kindness and requested us to place ourselves close together near the edge of the water and to sit or kneel down. We did so, expecting, we must confess, that they intended to slaughter us there. However, to our inexpressible joy, they formed themselves into a circular line around us and commanded their followers to pass on, thus protecting us from those who were disposed to injure us. And, fearing that we should be exposed to dangers from some stragglers who were at a distance behind, one of these chiefs joined our party and accompanied us till we had passed them. That's Te Wharenui. Went about 7 miles from Wesleydale, so this is around about 11, 12 o'clock. We were met by Mr. Stack and Mr. Clark, who, with about 12 natives, were hastening to our assistance. Mr. Stack had arrived at Kerikeri between 4 and 5 o'clock in the morning. Remember, he had left at 10 p.m. the night before. Monsieur Kemp and Clark, having perused our letter, evinced the kindest sympathy to us and prepared to render us immediate succour. They lost no time in dispatching a message to Paihia, another church missionary station, 15 miles from Kerikeri, to apprise the brethren there of what had transpired and to solicit their assistance. In the meantime, the party, which we now had the pleasure of meeting, set off without delay towards Whangaroa. It is sometime around now that Hongi receives his gunshot wound whilst pursuing Ngati Po. The narrative of our losses and dangers filled the minds of our friends with the greatest concern, and our meeting them was to us a source of great consolation, and we thus obtained that aid of which we greatly felt the necessity. Before we arrived at Kerikeri, the Paihia friends came up, probably this around 3 or 4 p.m, consisting of the Reverend Henry Williams, 35, Mr. Richard Davis, 36, Mr. William Pucky, 21, accompanied by Mr. Hamlin, 23. Now, I give these ages because we see photos of these people as old men, but of course this is them in their heyday. And upward of 20 natives. We were astonished at the expedition with which our kind and excellent friends had hastened to our relief, as only 18 hours had elapsed since Mr. Stack left Wesleydale without communication, and Paihia is a little short of 40 miles distance. The remainder of our way, about 6 miles, we travelled with comparative ease as the natives carried Mrs. Turner, Miss Davis and Mrs. Wade, who were quite exhausted with fatigue, the latter having fainted twice on the road, and thus about 7 p.m. in the evening, after a day spent in excessive toil and the most appalling danger, we reached a friendly asylum, thankful to God for our miraculous preservation and feeling deeply indebted to our brethren of the Church Mission for their tender sympathy and generous assistance. Well, you can certainly sympathise with their relief. So the Wesleyans and Co. arrive at Kerikeri on Wednesday evening about 7 p.m. At this time, Hongi is being littered back to Paihia, but won't reach there until around noon on the Thursday. Also, to Wharerahi, the guy who helped get them past the Hokianga war party, has mentions to Kemp for the Wesleyans to not remain at Kerikeri, since they were likely to be pursued and killed as refugees. On Thursday, the Wesleyans move from Kerikeri to Paihia. Going back to the account of Nathaniel Turner. On Friday, a note was received from Monsieur Clark and Kemp of Kerikeri, stating that tidings had reached them of a severe wound received by Hongi in pursuing the fugitive Ngati Po, that this news had produced considerable commotion among the natives at their station, many of them having gone to succour the wounded chief, and others preparing to follow them. That 2 of the principal men, before their departure, had assured them that in case of Shangi's death or of his being dangerously wounded, they, that is the natives, would certainly be plundered, and that, as they should have enough to do to defend themselves, they could not hold out any promise of protection to the missionaries. On Wednesday the 17th, about a week after Hongi being shot, we went to Rangihu, or Rangihoa, or Hoey, where we met some men who had just returned from Whangaroa. From these men, we learned that on the arrival at our mission settlement of the Hokianga party, whom we met on the 10th when we were fleeing to Kerikeri. They had driven away the first plunderers, who belonged to Shangi's party, and who were able to carry off only the most portable of the booty, and that they had seized the remainder themselves, that they had returned to Hokianga the following morning, loaded with the spoils. These men also informed us that Shangi was not dead, but that he had been shot through the body, that the ball had broken his collarbone and passed an oblique angle through the right breast and come out a little below the shoulder blade, close to the spine. On Wednesday, the 24th, it's 2 weeks after Hongi being shot, a letter was received from Mr. Clark of Kerikeri, stating that some messengers who had been sent to Shangi had brought intelligence of his being likely to recover and of his having almost utterly destroyed the Kaitangata tribe, who resided on the western side of Whangaroa Harbour. Their statement was that only 10 of the unhappy tribe were supposed to have escaped. That old Matapo, the chief, who was the principal actor in plundering the brig Mercury, was also slain. So this is the Kaitangata pā of Kahumoko in Pekapeka Bay. The attack on this was led by Ururo and Tarea, Hongi being bedridden. That Shangi's advice to the missionaries of Kerikeri was to remain on their station while he lives, but to flee to their own country as soon as he dies. That the contest in that quarter had been brought to a close, that is, the invasion of Whangaroa was now complete, and that natives were dispersing to their respective place of abode. The head of Matapo was, a few days afterwards, exhibited on a pole at the Bay of Islands as a trophy of Shangi's success. Okay, so Tuesday the 9th and Wednesday the 10th of January 1827 were pretty traumatic days for the Ngati Po, the Wesleyans and Hongi. Some further observations. Turi Katuku, the principal wife of Hongi, actually dies within a week or so of Hongi being shot. In Tolla Williment's account, she states that James Stack was accompanied by Tawena, David, a young Māori helper at the mission. Similarly, in James West Stack's account, this person is also mentioned. The fact that it's not mentioned in the report to CMS is strange. Anyway, the efforts of James Stack that night, and likely Tawena, had they occurred in a military setting, would have involved the awarding of medals for valour. Moon charts show that a 3/4 moon set around 1 a.m, so from then on it would have been starlight only. James Stack would have been awake from dawn on the Tuesday morning till, say, 9 p.m. on the Wednesday. 39 hours of being on the go. And I'm sure, prior to that, not many would have slept well in the preceding days. It was all pretty darn impressive. In Williment's book, she states the Whangaroa Māori, that is the 7 young Māori, 5 lads and 2 girls, who helped the Wesleyans in their journey to Kerikeri, had been given clothes and articles from the CMS store in return for their loyal assistance. But they were quickly stripped of these by some slaves because they were refugees. Such is the way of muru. It's bizarre, and I still have trouble coming to terms with it. In the days following the news of Hongi being wounded, the Bay of Islands and surrounds are in turmoil. Everyone, both natives and missionaries, are preparing for Toa attacks. If Hongi dies, then Toa parties will bring further chaos to the bay. For the mission stations at Rangihoua, Kerikeri and Paihia, anything of value is being brought to Kororareka and placed on ships for sending to Sydney. For the next 6 months, the missionaries will live with the basics. It is said that 20 tons of equipment is shipped out to Sydney. Fortunately for everyone, Hongi doesn't die, at least not for a while. The Wesleyans leave for Sydney on the 28th of January. They will return the following year, but not to Kaeo. No, not to Whangaroa, but to the more welcoming Hokianga. Well, folks, that brings us to the end of this episode. All my references and links are in the description below. The next episode shouldn't be too far away, so I look forward to your company then. But until then, hei kona, take it easy.